Welcome to Diving Deeper Discussions. I'm your host, Randy Isaac. On behalf of the American Scientific Affiliation, our purpose here is to discuss articles and book reviews that are published in our journal, Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith. And today we are concluding our discussion of the September 2023 issue, which was the 75th anniversary issue. And we're particularly pleased to have with us today the editor of the Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith, Jim Peterson. Welcome, Jim. There he is. You see him, say something so we can hear you.
Good to be here.
All right. That's great, Jim. It's good to be with us. And I think many of you here in the audience know your work, but they may not know you so well as a person. So let's take a few minutes and just kind of let people know who you are. So let's start from the beginning. Where were you born and raised, Jim?
Oh, well, I was born in El Paso, Texas.
Oh,
now
my.
that's West Texas. That's closer to Phoenix than it is to Dallas.
It's a big state.
It is. But I had many years growing up in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
Then in Minneapolis, you think of it as going out east. I went out east to college in Chicago to Northwestern University. And so after Northwestern...
What did you major in there?
I majored in the history and literature of global religions.
Oh my, that's a major. Interesting. Okay.
Oh, sure. So that's Buddhism and Sikhism and Islam, the whole range.
Yeah. Okay.
So then I went from there to Boston for graduate school at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary for a Master of Divinity.
I didn't realize you were here, Gordon Conwell.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I'm learning a lot.
I've spent a lot of time at Ipswich. I know just where you are.
All right.
So from there, I got a job teaching freshman humanities courses at the University of Iowa, and then did my
let's see.
PhD
Where's University of Iowa? I know Iowa State is in Ames, and where is?
It's easy. It's Iowa City on the Iowa River. University of Iowa.
Can't miss it, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Yeah.
So from there, went to do my PhD at the University of Virginia.
Well, you did get around.
Yeah. Well, Virginia had the right combination of people that I did a PhD in religion and philosophy, but my dissertation was on the ethics of gene editing before the term gene editing had been coined.
Mm-hmm.
So while I was at UVA, I was named a Henry Luce Scholar. So I went and spent a year teaching ethics at Ewha and Yonsei universities in Seoul, Korea. And
wow! How many years was that?
Just 1 year.
Just 1 year.
And then
that's a great experience.
Going west. Oh yeah, continued going west until eventually my wife and I ended up back in Virginia. So I can guarantee personally, we are on a globe. You go one direction long enough to get back home.
You go far enough, you can get here, right? Okay, so it is a sphere. Okay, we've got that.
It is. So that's what the flat Earth question in the article I've actually seen.
Right.
I've walked it out. So
you confirmed it that way,
yeah. Okay. So my first job was on the faculty of the medical school at UVA, and then moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, for a tenure track job at Wingate University. And it was, let's see, from Wingate, an opportunity came up. That was the time where the Human Genome Project under Francis Collins was quite active. Yeah. They had lots of money, and they devoted some money to what they called ELSI, Ethical, Legal, and Social Implications. And one of the programs that's sponsored was they chose 5 theologians from the United States to have personal experience in clinical and lab genetics work in hope that they would be informed when they made theological or philosophical commentary. And so I was one of those 5. My particular project, I had a year where I was working in Ray Crow's lab. And now this will really date me. My project was microsatellite marking to find the genes in panic disorder.
Really?
So yes, so I did that for a
Amazing.
year,
Hmm.
and when I came back, I had an invitation from Alistair McGrath to come
Hmm.
work in a think tank with him at Oxford for 3 years.
You were 3 years in Oxford with Alistair McGrath.
Right.
That is
And
wonderful.
so it was while I was there that I wrote a book called Genetic Turning Points
Hmm.
about the ethics of gene editing that was published by Erdman's.
Hmm.
I came back from Oxford, back to Charlotte again, and had an offer to come to McMaster University in the Greater Toronto area, West
Hmm.
Hamilton.
Yeah.
And they recruited me with an endowed chair they called the Roy A. Hope Chair.
Yeah.
The local newspaper put it on their front page as that I'd been called to be the ray of hope at McMaster University,
Oh,
which
that's
had a
great.
nice
Yeah,
ring. Had a
that's
nice
where
ring
I
to it.
caught up with you. That's the first, so I didn't know
But,
any of that history, but you're
but
in
I want
there.
to give full credit to Roy A. Hope, who endowed that particular chair. So I
Good.
trained PhD students there and MD students
Hmm.
for about 11 years. And then Roanoke College and Virginia Tech offered me the Schumann Chair in Ethics to come down to the Shenandoah Valley.
Hmm.
And that's actually where my wife grew up in the Shenandoah Valley.
Uh,
So it was a real homecoming. We couldn't pass up an opportunity to come back to her home area.
that's great. Wow. So you've
And
really
that's
had
where
a
we
few
are currently.
moves. You've been
Right,
moving
right.
around a little bit. Now you finally
I
settled
guess
in
so.
here, right?
Well,
That's
I've
good.
generally stayed in each place for a pretty good block of time, but uh, it starts to add up when you look back over
It does. You got
a career.
that's a great history. So how uh tell us a bit about your faith background. How did you evolve in that arena?
Yeah, I'd have to actually start with Mickey Mouse. I was
Okay.
about 5 years old when I was looking for the Mickey Mouse Club on my three-channel black and white TV. And to my horror, the club was being preempted by a guy who was just standing there talking. But I started to listen and just came into such an awareness and conviction of my own sin and need for repentance and desire to know Jesus as my Savior. And so I prayed the sinner's prayer with him. It was Billy Graham, by the way.
Hmm.
And he said that if you just prayed that with him, that you should read a Bible and go to church. So I didn't have my own wheels. I couldn't get to a church. But I did ask my parents for a Bible, and they found a children's Bible for me. And it would have the Bible story, and then it would have questions that you would answer. And I very carefully every day worked my way through that. And it wasn't until maybe about middle school, early high school, that I met some people who talked about knowing Jesus not only as Savior, but as Lord, that you could, on a
Hmm.
daily
Hmm.
basis, you could know him and follow and serve him. So that was an exciting discovery and a major change.
Hmm.
Uh, so in college, I was very active in InterVarsity and then went on to seminary where you had the alphabet soup at
Yeah.
Gordon Conwell. You had
Right.
50 different
Of
denominations
course, you had
represented.
everything there, right?
Right.
Mm.
Came to the
Okay.
conviction that the best fit was to be ordained as an American Baptist. So I
Mm.
was ordained at Emmanuel Baptist Church in Ipswich, Massachusetts. So in
Oh
your
my.
hometown.
Okay. Yeah.
And then when we moved to Canada, transferred very smoothly my ordination to Canadian Baptists
Hmm.
and still have my ordination there.
Okay. So now you're back to Virginia Baptist.
Well, I'm
Uh,
back in Virginia and actually part of
yeah.
what's called a cooperative Baptist church, which is aligned with the Canadian
Yeah.
Baptist.
Interesting. So, how did you connect with the ASA? How'd you become aware of that, and how'd you join?
Yeah. In 1979, Bob Herman came to give a lecture at Gordon Conwell.
Hmm.
And I was already very interested in science and what might be the relationship with Christian faith. And so he talked about not only that topic, but also invited people to discover the ASA.
Hmm.
So that's where I first became connected.
Great. Okay. So you said that was 79?
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, so let's follow your trail to becoming editor. How did you connect that path?
Okay. Well, I was active in ASA. I went to a number of annual meetings, which I really enjoyed and appreciated. Certainly watched for the journal each quarter
Mm-hmm.
and read that very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, after it, I got frustrated with the book review section that I'd be interested, say, in reviewing a book, and my mail service wasn't apparently as fast as others because when I would ask Richard Rubel for a book to review, he'd say, "Oh, I already sent that out." So under Ari, or maybe it was the editor before, I suggested that we needed to professionalize the book review accounts. So we had great people writing great reviews, but
It's
it'd be
Roman
really
Miller. Yeah.
helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Roman Miller, of course.
Yeah.
It'd be really helpful to have people who had expertise on the particular subject write the review of a new book in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was appointed as the first book review editor to create that system
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
and
remember
served that
that.
for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Ari announced that he was leaving his editorship at the journal, there was a general announcement and applications and went through a long process of application, answering questions and
Mm-hmm.
interviews, and eventually was invited to serve as editor of the journal.
Mm-hmm.
So I started as
Right.
editor of the journal, was listed as the editor. There's a long lead time in
Yeah.
2011, and then formally in 2012.
Right. Yeah. So it's been a journey, and you recently submitted your resignation.
I did.
So
I did.
another
So,
stage of life, huh?
right. There's never enough time to do all the things you find interesting and or feel called to do. And
Mm-hmm.
this has been 17 years on the masthead of perspectives. It's time to let
Mm-hmm.
some new ideas, some new people take the lead, and I'll go on to some new projects.
Okay.
But
Well,
I'll keep reading the journal and I'll be watching carefully to
of
see how it's
course you
going.
will. Right. Exactly. Well, we certainly appreciate your tenure here. It's been a long and good run. So all right. So let's zero in a bit more on the journal and this particular article that we're discussing today. Um, First of all, this issue was the 75th anniversary issue. So tell us a little bit about um, the history here. You know, what is the objective of the perspectives here? I guess that's not what it was called at the beginning. Can you give us a little bit of the history here of what's how the journal got started and where it at, and it's 75 years.
Yeah, quite a story when you think about it. That 75 years ago, just after World War II, there was a gathering of in Chicago of about five or
Mm-hmm.
six scientists who wanted to learn from each other and to help others. They thought they needed some sort of forum for the discussion of science and faith. And really, this is the first regular peer-reviewed journal of its type. So they were real pioneers in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
They had two primary objectives right from the beginning. One was that they would bring forward the best of the sciences, very broadly conceived,
Mm-hmm.
and that they wanted to bring that into dialogue with the best of Christian theology.
Mm-hmm.
So in your 75th edition, you probably saw, let's see if I can pull that up.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah.
a page
Right.
of the
Get.
journal. And what I want you to notice is Psalm 111, verse 10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That has appeared on the cover of every issue right up 75 years to the present.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a deep and abiding connection right from the beginning of those two books of trying to bring into dialogue the very best of the sciences with the very best of Christian theology.
Yep.
And that's such an important area. I mean, the Christian tradition is the most widespread global movement in the world today, with about 2.5 billion adherents.
Mm-hmm.
And science is always growing in its influence. So, where these two can talk with each other and interact with each other is actually crucial to understanding our
Mm-hmm.
world and what our Lord might be doing in it.
Right. Okay. So how'd you come up with the idea of a 75th issue here, and particularly this particular article, collecting this? It seems like a novel idea here.
Well, I mean, it was great fun to do, and that I'm personally partial to every article in the journal. I mean, any article that's published in the journal has been chosen because the author and the peer reviewers and the editor are all convinced that it's new, that it's important, that it's clear, that it's well informed. So every article counts and matters, and it's like breathing. It's a constant influx of really positive, helpful ideas and insights. But we're all individuals. We work in different fields and different places. And so certain articles will stand out to certain people at particular times, and it might even vary over the time in their career. But there are articles that have come at just the right moment, that God's Spirit has used it to be life-changing. And so it was fun to ask the fellows, to give them the opportunity and just say, has there been a particular article that stood out to you and that made a difference for you? And what was that? And do you find it still vital and particularly interesting to you today? So what difference did it make for you originally? And do you still see that as a fruitful input?
So you got a good response here. I don't know if you filtered them, but you were publishing 25 of them here. I'm curious how many of you here on the program submitted one and had one published. How many of you are one of the 25? Let's see, I don't know if I could see the gallery here. There's Arnold Sycamore. Who else?
Bill Jordan.
You can use the formal raised hand because it's hard to see on a video.
Strand.
Mark Strand. Yeah. Bill Jordan.
Josma.
3. Okay. Tony. Okay. 4. All right. Okay. Yeah, so we got a few who didn't join, but that's great. So we're going to, why don't we open it up for discussion, Vicki, if you enable the microphones and we can have a good discussion on what happens. Let's start with the questions that were submitted in advance. And as has become typical now, Del Kuhn got the first question in here. So Del, good to see you. You're on.
Hi, Randy. Thanks. And Jim, appreciate the issue and about the idea of the article. And I was struck by the variety of responses and how the initial connection to ASA was made. And I want to look forward a little bit to the 100th anniversary retrospective. And I know you'll be submitting things because you're not going to be editing it, but I'm wondering what effect postmodernism is going to have on the next generation, because we generally believe that all truth is God's truth, and we operate in a framework of Galileo's 2 books of Revelation. But postmodernism, I think, is, by redefining truth, is undermining both sides of the science-faith debate by saying there can be no authoritative reading of a text, questioning whether a text actually points to anything outside of its own self, and finally, whether there's anything besides socially determined small t truths versus one capital T truth that would make some of the small t truths false. So what are your thoughts about what's going to come along in the next generation?
Well, first, Del, I like the idea that you and I will both be around in 25 years to read the 100th anniversary. That sounds pretty good. If truth is completely socially conditioned, then maybe that affirmation is socially conditioned too. I think we need to remind people who go fully onto the postmodern perspective that it might be undermining their claim to truth that is what's actually they know is happening. But like most half-truths, it's half true. We are deeply influenced by our experiences, our context, what's valuable to us. One of the things that I find beautiful and joyful about science and good theology is that they delight in finding anomalies. It's exciting to find that you've obtained some new resource or information that doesn't fit with how you understood things before. That's an opportunity to discover and an opportunity to learn. So what I'm driving for is what I would call comprehensive coherence. What makes the best sense of all of the information that I have available to me, empirical and other sources? So I do think that there are things in science which are pretty settled. Right now, I doubt that we're going to ever find out evidence that, after all, the sun really is circling around the Earth. I think we're pretty settled. But there's lots that we don't know absolutely. We know so little overall of all there is to know. So it's really helpful to very carefully listen to multiple perspectives. And that's why it made it into our title of the journal, right? We always point out that it's perspectives, plural. What I see right now is that, and what we might see being dealt with in the future, is that the dominant clash is between two groups primarily. One is empirical materialism, the idea that if you can't measure it with science, it doesn't count, it doesn't exist. That's a mistake about the nature of science. Science is very good at what it does, but only at what it does. And so science can be very good at looking for material causation, but it really doesn't do very well when it comes to discerning if my wife loves me, or who I should marry, or whether I should do science. Science just doesn't address those things that are important and that are real. The other movement that I see very powerfully right now is a kind of new version of romanticism, that what really matters to me is only what I personally feel. And again, half-truths are half true. There's a real advantage to that perspective in that it opens you up to things like proper feeling and love and beauty. And it's very accessible, but it's very shaky ground to claim that it should matter and does matter to others. It tends to be very subjectively isolated. So I agree that postmodernism has been a major question and challenge. I think it's had its day. I think in terms of academic elites who are really thinking about it, it's being transcended by a tug between empirical materialism and this new version of romanticism. We have something really to say to that, knowing Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life, and also the power of science within its sphere, what it does well, that there's a lot more than just our subjective impression. Is that at all what you're thinking about or close to
it? I'd say pretty much in that direction. Okay. I'm wondering how, again, it's a wonder, because I was really introduced to the liberal arts in general in the 90s at the University of Chicago.
Okay.
Basic program, which was not a degree program. And there the instructors were pretty much anti-Derrida, anti-postmodern,
okay.
Which for me, I didn't know what it was that they were anti about. Sure. So I tend to agree with you, but the fact that we think, we meaning our society, probably the 20-somethings that are coming along, probably really do think differently than we do. You know, I identify with C.S. Lewis's point of writings. I don't know whether someone who's 20-ish has that same resonance with them that I do. And I'm kind of thinking, how are we in the church preparing the next generation to come along? So I basically in agreement with your answers. I like them. No arguments.
Well, can I have a follow on, since you're talking about what we think might be different 25 years in the future? Let's think backwards 25 years. What is there today that wasn't anticipated 25 years ago? What are some of the surprises that came up that we really didn't anticipate back in what was that, late 90s?
Well, I mean, I'll give a very dangerous example in our current context. It's the idea that this romantic idea that your identity and reality is determined by your personal self-perception and feelings is something that was not very prevalent 25 years ago and is now dominant.
Mm-hmm.
And so that comes out in a whole series of different ways that we really didn't have to address before. So one of those would be, for example, you have a 10-year-old girl who is sure that she's a boy. And even if her genes are for one sex, and even if her genitalia are for one sex, because her subjective self-impression is that she is the other, that is what can cause the freezing of hormones, the cutting off of genitalia, a complete transformation. Now, it's interesting, that's become the prevailing philosophy in the United States, and it's often presented as the scientific conclusion, but that is not allowed in Stockholm, or in London, or in Finland, or in Germany, or in France. It's really the United States that's gone far into this romantic idea of self-perception determines all reality. And that's just not a question that carries the day in Europe. And it's not an idea that carried the day in the United States 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So yes, there are things that come into intellectual life that become very influential, that people know they're true because everybody knows they're true, and don't get challenged until we start to move away from it. I think the idea of surgically sterilizing a child before the age of 18 will be seen in the not distant future the way we look at lobotomy now. Something that was well-intentioned, that was compassionate, but wasn't actually best for the child. We do know that a great majority of children who are diagnosed with gender dysphoria, once they've gone through puberty and all of the hormones that are involved in that process, decide that they like the sex they were born with. And so if they've lost genitalia, if they have lost the coursing of hormones during adolescence, they've lost an opportunity that would have given them the privilege of having congruence, mm-hmm. that they've lost by prematurely jumping on that particular proposed solution. So, okay. I mean, there's a very concrete, practical response to your question, right. Which is controversial because we haven't completely resolved it yet.
Mm-hmm. Right. And of course, there are a lot of ongoing issues that seemingly will never get resolved, right?
Well, what are you thinking of?
I mean, people are still asking about the age of the Earth and evolution and things like that, which never get resolved, which is amazing, that there's a continuity. Anyway, okay, we have another question submitted in advance of Steve Hall. Steve, are you on? Okay, so I will read his question if that's all right. Okay, where is it now? Okay, here we go. So Steve Hall said, what a great set of essays by some excellent scientist theologians and about topics, individuals who have impacted them and the world. So thankful for diving deeper in general and this one in particular. I hope to join and have one general question. What great scientists and or theologians should we more seriously invite to share their insights? I'm thinking of NT, Tom Wright, biologist Francis Collins, or, for example, our plenary speakers from previous and future conferences. I know Collins put in a piece in 2002. Thanks. Want to comment on that, Jim?
Sure. We very carefully choose our speakers at conferences, and so they're always interesting and have good and important ideas to share. And we always talk with them and invite them to contribute to the journal peer review process. So, for example, Lydia Yeager, you probably remember, spoke at the 2021 Chicago meeting, and she developed her talk from there to appear as the lead article in our March 2022 issue of the journal. So that's a great resource and absolutely interested in that. The people who come and speak at our conferences realize that there's a difference between a conference talk and a peer-reviewed journal article. And they just don't always have the time to do the bibliography, to do the checking, to get through the peer review process. It's just a further level of thoroughness and demand to do that well. But many do, and so glad for that. As far as his suggestion of having somebody like Tom write for the journal, I would be thrilled. He would be a terrific contributor. Would be glad to hear from Francis Collins again. I wonder, the Christian Century, when it existed for decades, had a column called How My Mind Has Changed, where leading thinkers would write a column about how they had changed in their thinking about something. Maybe we should introduce that again. I think that's an interesting idea. And I'm certainly interested in and would welcome whatever suggestions for other people we should approach, particularly if you have a particular topic you'd like to hear them address.
Right. Well, it's something that the new editor may want to do. One of the innovations that I think, well, maybe not a completely new innovation that you introduced was theme issues. I think there have been a few special extra editions in the past. I could think of 3 or 4 of those, but these were theme issues of regular issues. Can you comment a little bit on your intent there and whether you're happy with it? How did it work in your opinion?
Yeah, I'm most excited as an editor when an essay arrives out of the blue that is new and important and clear and well-informed and bringing up a topic that I didn't even realize needed to be addressed, or that could be addressed in such a fresh and interesting way. So part of what we're dealing with as a peer-reviewed journal is that most of the material we publish is spawned by scholars who know their field and know what's important, what needs to be done, what they can contribute, and they volunteer it. So I can't force volunteering. I mean, I can't know everything about everybody or everything, so I depend on people to speak up from the perspective of their discipline about what they can offer. The theme issues are an opportunity to say that we've found somebody who has some expertise in the area, that knows there are things that need to be addressed, and we want to encourage essays in that area. So we've had a series of theme issues pretty regularly to reach out to and to encourage people to reflect and contribute on topics that we know are important and needed. So, for example, right now you'll be seeing You're the First to Know. In the March issue, we're expecting to have a trigger essay, which will talk about some of the latest developments in restoration ecology, and we'll invite further commentary and articles on that topic. So we do try to reach out and encourage certain articles. Of course, we're always welcoming ones that surprise us.
Very good. Okay. All right. So let's open it up for discussion. If those of you who have a comment or a question, if you can go to the reactions icon down below, you may have to click on the more, the 3 dots in the more, and see the reactions. And under that, you've got a raised hand. So if you do that, I'll call on you and we can continue our discussion here. So, but while we're doing that, let's hear some of your perspectives about the. Oh wait, we got one there. All right, I'll delay my comment till later. Mark Strand, good to see you there. Yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to take a moment to thank Jim for his work as editor. And I do think this is a very creative issue. Of course, it was an honor to contribute a piece, but also I don't really have a question as much as just to say I just love the way for 75 years we've just had an ongoing conversation of scholarship in this area, and Jim has kept it going. And these diving deeper is just another innovation. So appreciate all the good work, and thanks for all that you guys do to keep the conversations going.
Thank you, Mark, for that and for all of your contributions. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Looks like you're on your way somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. He's got his picture going back and forth.
I'm at home. I'm just down in my basement, just kind of walking around. I got a family and all busy and things.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, Jim, while we're waiting for others to prop up here, of these 25, you nicely arranged them in a chronological sequence here in terms of the way they were. Can you comment on what kind of change you saw happening over that time? I mean, the different topics of changing focus, changing interest, changing emphasis, or changing ideas about certain topics. What did you see in that in that time frame from these submissions?
Yeah, a very appropriate question. I see. One of the things that most struck me was that occasionally, I don't see this as much now, but there used to be a time where I'd run into people that thought of perspectives as being dedicated solely to articles about origins. And that's always been important, and it's always mattered. And it's actually very broad. I mean, to do origins well, you have to think about biblical exegesis and anthropology and archaeology and cosmology. It can draw from all the different scientific disciplines. But during the time that I've been editor, I'd say that things that are related to origins have been an important part, but maybe about a quarter of what we publish. That 3/4 have been other topics, which I think is really important for dealing with science and faith. And it's interesting, when I go back and look at the oldest issues, that was true of perspectives from the beginning. And it's true as well when you look at chronologically articles that people picked out of particular importance to them. The article that was cited from 1971, Bernard Ram, was about dealing with technology. The one from 73 by Carl Ammerding was biblical perspectives on ecology. The 1985 one that Mann pointed out was by Colin Humphreys on the date of the crucifixion, bringing together astronomy and history. I think it's interesting when people cite the articles that have been important to them. Origins certainly play an important part, and we appreciate those. But we are not just an origins publication by any means. The whole breadth of the sciences and Christian theology have been part of ASA from the beginning, and that's good to see.
Right. Okay. Yeah, there were some graphs about the evolving graphs of the different topics that were in there. Where did I see that? It's I guess Alton Everest had one from way back in his book, but didn't someone have it more recently? Trying to remember.
I don't recollect that just offhand.
Yeah.
What is your memory of?
Did Dot and Janelle have something in their article that we discussed last time?
Yeah, they had some graphs, Randy.
Right.
That's what I was thinking you might be thinking of.
Yeah, I could probably be thinking of that. Yeah. So, but I think you're it's a very good point there, Jim, that from the very beginning, the way Alton Everest put it out is that, yeah, origins and related things have always kind of been there, but they haven't been over 50%, and it has not been the dominant kind of piece. But it certainly is a continuing one. It's an enduring issue topic. So, all right, let's get over to your questions a little bit. We got John Wood and then Dave Saunders. John, you're first.
Thanks, Randy. And Jim, I just thank you so much. You know, we've interacted. I've actually put in at least one article while you were editor, and I've been on the receiving end of those peer reviews and really appreciate the careful way that you have conducted that peer review process. It's just interesting. And in that context, I'd like you to think about our journal and say a bit more, because you did say some things about us and where Perspectives has been. Like, it's one of the very first journals like this. It has a long, long history. And I'm recalling one time you told me a bit, you go to the AAR meetings, I think, and you meet with editors, you're around them. Tell us a bit more about what is the place of Perspectives in this publication world, because we've had people, I want to put that in context. We've had people say to us, it's time is done. Something else needs to happen,
Wow.
So
Okay.
Set the stage for us here.
Sure, I'll be very specific, because this is something that one definitely has to think about with the journal. I'd argue that PSCF has a niche of real service by being more immediate than the achingly slow pace of book publishing. But it has scholarship and peer review. It can be more accurate and insightful than web forums and journalism. So it's not just off-the-cuff conversation. It's actually very carefully vetted and followed through. So when you compare that to other publications, Our Own God and Nature is a webzine that nicely reaches out to more popular audiences. Biologos is a series of short pieces intended for non-academics and focused on origins. Science and Christian Belief has a similar remit to PSCF, but it's centered in the UK. Theology and Science is written for academic theologians and not as concerned about historic Christian faith. Zygon is diffuse with broad concern for all religions. So I'm just going through a list of other publications that are kind of in our space. And each one has a very different approach and constituency and authorship and direction of what it's trying to do. So I see Perspectives as being unique in bringing carefully vetted but timely information that is authored at a scholarly level but accessible, that we really work hard to speak in a way that makes sense and is accurate for specialists, but which can be read by erudite, thoughtful people in other disciplines. And so it's a lot to think about. It's extremely demanding for our authors. They not only have to get their material right for a specialist, they have to express it in a way that they can convey it to somebody thoughtful in another discipline. We ask a lot, but I think we end up with something that is of real service.
Does that get expressed by uptake, like citations? I think you've been following recently some of the metrics on this stuff by uptake and citations, and also by do other journals, other editors contact you about what we're doing? Can you tell us a little more about that?
I mean, uptake comes in many different forms. It's fun that I'd say once every couple of weeks, I'll get a request from somebody who wants to translate an article into their native language to be published in their journal. English is so dominant as a publication form these days that even people, I hear this all the time, even people in Germany who want their article to be read, write in English because that's what will be read globally. So English is dominant, but you still have people who appreciate seeing things in their own language. And so I'm struck by how many people are going to the effort to translate articles from our journal into Spanish, Portuguese, Polish. I mean, they come in from all over. So there's uptake in that sense. If by uptake you mean hits on the website where somebody goes and downloads an article, we've been tracking that from just EBSCO alone, and Randy has these numbers better than I do. My recollection is from EBSCO in the first 9 months of this year, we had about 86,000 article downloads. Now, that's not even counting how many people read our print versions or share our print version, or people who are coming in from other sources. That's just one of the ways people can tap our articles, and it's in the tens of thousands of downloads.
Yeah, yeah.
We also see perspectives being cited in other journals. One that was just fun because it was such a surprise was to see ASA very prominently in an article in The Atlantic, which is a journal that has nothing to do in particular with Christian faith, let alone science and Christian faith. But there was an article about science and Christian faith in The Atlantic, and they're prominently featured, quoted multiple times favorably, was perspectives on science and Christian faith. So I would, of course, like to see more reach. There are many different ways we can try to measure that, and we are getting substantial reach. Now, I'll be clear and to be balanced. We do have the World of Science measure of citations, which does not work for us because they intentionally exclude us. They say that if a journal is listed in their database as having a religious aspect, it will not be counted. And so if you're looking at World of Science, I think that's a real mistake. And it might be up to the next editor to pursue and challenge it, see if we can get it changed. I certainly made a run at that, and that was the response I got, that as an editorial decision, they simply will not count citations from a journal that has any kind of religion in its title. So that would not measure what our impact is from that particular angle.
You mean citations in our journal or citations to that journal?
World of Science will count how often an article from a particular journal is quoted in another article.
But if it's quoted in PSCF, they won't count it?
No, if somebody is writing an article for Nature and they quote from perspectives, they will not count it as a quotation because it came from a religious journal.
I didn't know that.
So if you're looking, I mean, some universities like Virginia Tech, where I am, they want you to keep a very clear record of how many citations and how influential your citations are. But because the Web of Science excludes religious journals, it doesn't appear there. So that's a counting mechanism that does not reflect what impact we have.
Okay.
That strikes me, Jim, is very similar to the emphasis on evolution, thinking we're an origins journal only in perspectives. It's the cultural framing of the science-religion relationship. And those are very hard tropes to move. I mean, it's very difficult to move a society. You think about our mission to speak to the church and to speak to science, and it's a huge nut to crack. And that's a practical expression of it. Thank you for that.
Okay, let's move on. We got go ahead, Jim. I didn't mean
I was just going to say, so an organization like EBSCO that is secular but does count journals, including religious ones, we do very well.
Okay, Dave Saunders.
I'm going to raise everything I'm going to say is actually connected, and I'm going to raise a positive comment that I wanted to make about a couple of the at least 2 of the 25 entries here. And since this discussion has come up about the perception of the ASA as being an origins-only organization, I could tell you a little bit about my history on that. I remember back in the mid-'60s at MIT, one of the members of our IB group arranged to have some people from the ASA come in and talk to us on a Saturday afternoon about, serving God in your scientific callings. And I thought, that's really interesting. And let me tell you, some of the real old timers were there, like Marlon Kreider. I don't know. I'm sure some of you must remember Marlon. But anyway, I looked at the journal that was on the table up front there, and I flipped through a couple of them, and they were almost all about the whole content seemed to be about origins, and that kind of discouraged me from joining the ASA. And I think that was 1965, and I didn't actually join until about 4 years later in 1969. So just a little bit of, maybe it was just a bad sampling of the old journals that I loved. Okay. But anyway,
you have a question with this, or
no? That was comment. Just a
okay. All right. Thank you very much, Dave. Yeah,
I do have a. I'm very much encouraged when the theme of serving God in science comes up. And one thing that I've been getting from a lot of my contemporaries at MIT was, "Oh, well, you should go into science because you get to go into if you go into an academic world, you might be the only Christian in your department or the only Christian on the campus, and you're going into a field where you can witness to people who would never walk into the door of a church." And that was it was good from a witnessing view, but it didn't really speak to the value of doing the science itself, which I think over the years I have found the ASA to be very good at. And I noticed that at least two of the people who are impacted here, somebody brought up a review of an article by Keith and Ruth Miller, and then a couple of pages later there was a review of some how Randy Isaac had impacted somebody, and both of those articles brought up the view that they said, well, when I was in high school or when I was an undergraduate, I was basically told that the only thing science is good for in the church is that you get to go into science and then you can critique it. You can go study evolution and then you can go shoot it down or something. And, these people were very glad to get a broader perspective from reading articles in the perspectives.
Okay.
And so, I think that as to where we're going in the next 25 years, that this is a very serious issue, and also in a broader sense. My own rector here in Raleigh has commented at times about his vision for what a student ministry would look like. We actually don't have many students coming to our church. We do have a lot of young career people.
Okay.
But one thing he said he wanted to fight was the idea that the church exists to train people to be warriors on the campus. You come to the church to get fortified, so you can go and shoot down all of this secular stuff on the campus.
Yeah. Okay, Dave, I think we need to move on. Thank you very much for your comment there. Paul Carr, you're next on our list.
Yeah, I resonated with your question, Randy, about problems that are worse today than they were, or things have changed. And I think the biggest problem is, one of the big problem is the plethora of information and unedited information, including misinformation, and the paucity of truth. And that's largely because I understand most people get their news these days with social media, which is unedited and full of misinformation. And we in the scientific community, of course, particularly with refereed and editors, that's not an issue. But how do we correct this situation? It's affecting particularly our politics.
Yeah, solve the problem for us, Jim.
Well, I think peer review and perspectives is part of the solution. We can each just do our piece, but that we do have anonymous peer review by experts before an article is accepted for publication and then as it's developed for publication. That assumes and reinforces the idea that every opinion is not as good as every other, that you can make a case for certain ideas and views and facts, and that we are seeking and pursuing those. So we're certainly fighting the good fight of trying to make sure that it is truth with a capital T, both scientifically and also in knowing our Lord, and where those two work together. So absolutely, Paul, that's a big part of who we are and what we're trying to do.
Setting the example.
So send people copies of the journal. Encourage them to read it.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Arnold.
Yeah, thanks, Randy, for hosting this, and Jim for all your excellent work as editor over these years. I'm not sure how we're going to replace you in that role, but that's the ASA's problem. My question is about something in the approach of the ASA. So if you go to the ASA website under the About page, it says our approach, where there's honest disagreement on an aspect of science, Christian faith, or the relationship between the two. The ASA strives to create a safe environment in which dialogue can flourish and diverse, even contrasting ideas can be discussed with courtesy and respect. Now, I'm wondering, Jim, how you've dealt with the question of assessing honest disagreement in contributions that come to the journal. It's pretty hard to assess someone's honesty, but I guess when you send things out for peer review, we assess sort of competence and these kinds of things. And so I wonder how it's worked out in terms of the editorial perspective in dealing with contributions that may come from a wide range of views, and helping authors understand that the reason your piece is not being published is because it doesn't show respect, or it seems to not be an area of honest disagreement, but there's something else going on here. I wonder if you can reflect a bit on that and how that's run in your time as editor.
Yeah, it's, as you point out, it's very hard to judge people's heart or their motivation. So we have to look at the text they actually submit. And that is part of the beauty of the anonymous peer review system, in that when a piece is accepted for peer review, I go through and I strip out all references to the author. And so when a peer reviewer is looking at that piece, they're not thinking, oh, I remember what this person said, or this person has a beef with that person, or they didn't get promoted. They just have to look at the text. Now, if you're an expert in the area, sometimes people try to guess who's the author, and they'll ask me, this is written by so-and-so, isn't it? And I say, well, if it's published, you'll find out with their name, but that's not something I can affirm or deny at this point. That's part of why we anonymize the process, so that we just deal with the text in front of us. So I think when the ASA talks about honest disagreement, maybe when we're face-to-face, we can do more of that in a local chapter or at an annual meeting. At the journal, I think one of our strengths is we have a certain distance built in, that we're just looking at the text as submitted and not the personality. Is that what you're thinking about at all? Or?
It's not, I don't think it's only personality, but I suppose you've probably had to reject a number of articles, and you've talked earlier about how, what fraction of articles are not even published. It seems to be a pretty good sign of a competent quality journal that you publish a certain small fraction of those that are submitted. And sometimes people might just be claiming, well, you won't publish mine because you disagree. It's not it's not published, it's not because of the science, but because of the view you have about science. And so I wonder to what degree you've had to engage authors, maybe more than just in a back and forth, but helping them understand, well, here's why we're not publishing. And I know that you've and maybe you've reflected elsewhere, I think, in terms of how you work with authors, and not just simply give them a binary reject accept option.
Now, this takes a tremendous amount of time and effort, but I see it as part of the service and ministry of the journal and of myself as editor, that I don't just say, this doesn't meet our needs at this time, binary, and drop it. I take the risk of saying peer review has said, and often quote at length from peer review, Or if it's not even really ready for peer review, then I do peer review in the sense that I read very carefully and I say, these are the things that need to be developed or improved to then avail ourselves of peer reviewer time. So I give real specific. So I might say to an author, this is terrific, but you actually published this in our journal about 10 years ago. And as a matter of policy, we don't repeat what has already been published, let alone by the same author. So you need to bring new material, which we would love to see. Or, that would just be a concrete example. So it is true that of the essays that are offered to me, I accept for peer review about half. So there's about half that will get a careful response back. Here's what's needed to get it ready for peer review. And if the person then disappears, that's the end of it. If they come back and deal with what needed to be addressed, then it goes on to peer review. Editors, when they talk with each other, talk about the nightmare of getting people to do peer review, that it's not paid for, you don't get credit for it. And so there's a widespread experience of having trouble finding people to do peer review. I find that when I ask a person to do peer review, I have about a 90% success rate. And I think part of that is because I don't send it to peer review unless I think it has a genuine chance of being developed into an article. In other words, it's already pretty good. And I know that it's of interest to this particular expert I'm sending it to. So when I ask them for peer review, usually the reaction is they know that I send them interesting stuff that's of good quality, and they're happy to invest their time and effort into it. So about half of what is submitted makes it to peer review. Once we get the peer review, about half eventually ends up being published. And that might involve some rewriting. It's not at all unusual for peer reviewers to say, I will advocate this being published if these two things are addressed, or if this thing is corrected. So once the peer review does come in, as much as possible, I pass that directly to the author to help them to improve their essay or article. So I really try to avoid it being a black box. I try to give authors as much direct, specific feedback as possible as to what the issues are. If they then interpret that as a personal attack, I don't know how I can avoid that besides being gracious and diplomatic and saying what's good as well as what needs more work. I will say this, there's a really strong tendency among authors to think that if they publish something in the journal, it's solely the result of their brilliant effort. And if something's not accepted, it's solely a result of the perversity or idiocy of the editor. There's just a natural human tendency to interpret it that way. And I've taken a lot of flack, but I've also gotten a remarkable number of thank you notes from people who were turned down before peer review or in peer review, where they say, my gosh, you didn't just say no, you actually explained to me what I need. I'm going to work on this. Thank you. And that's encouraging.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Arnold. Bill, good to see you.
My question, James, is I think you've done an excellent job in the journal of showing a balance of different opinions. I'm not so sure the journal shows a balance of all the various science disciplines. And I know you can't publish things that aren't submitted, but how do we get some of the underrepresented subdisciplines to submit more articles?
Well, the only tool that I really have is theme issues, where we can state a specific invitation. So, for example, we hadn't had much published in chemistry for a while, and I was delighted that Steve Kontakis wrote a very fine article about chemistry and Christian faith and put that out there, and we did get some articles as a result. So that's what the tool of theme issues is intended to do. Is there a particular discipline that you see missing that maybe I should be looking more for? What are you thinking of?
Well, I think my own discipline, but I'm one of the authors who hasn't submitted yet. So
I should mention that I remember vividly, Bill, that you had proposed an article on let's see, I've actually got the title in my database.
I'm still interested in that. It's a Christian approach to sustainable engineering.
Right, right. So enough for everybody forever. Wasn't that the title?
Yes.
Yes. I would love to see that. Please send that
in. There you go, Bill. Thanks for volunteering. That's good. Tom?
Well, I wanted to thank Jim for this 17 years of service to the ASA. That's been wonderful. And I have looked at this problem, this 160-year-old thorn in the side of Christianity, and that is the Darwinian evolution. And I gather that ASA believes in mainstream science, but I'd like to know what the definition is from ASA's point of view. Like, is there a common ancestor? Is it a godless, unguided process, or something else?
My sense of what I see submitted to the journal is that the idea that evolution is inherently godless and that evolution requires that there be no purpose behind it is not something that most ASA members would affirm. ASA members coming through peer review and in submission, if they reject that God used evolution, it's not because evolution by definition could not be used by God. I don't see that argument. But is there still variation in did God use evolution? And if God used evolution, did that include humanity? Did it not? I certainly see that conversation continuing.
Mm-hmm. One resolution that we believe is logical, and that is that scientists have been trying for over 70 years to build a living cell and can't come anywhere close, right? So it takes more intelligence than mankind has. So it takes super intelligence, and that's God's domain. Evolution, by definition, doesn't have any intelligence. So it shouldn't even be in the running as the cause of life or the origin of life as we see it.
Freestanding by itself would be contrary to the idea of God as creator. And I think that the Apostles' Creed that starts right off with, we believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, is very much a part of ASA's DNA. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a real consensus that God is the creator. The conversation tends to be, what methods did God choose to use to create?
Mm-hmm. Well, one example we look at is for the bases of DNA, for example, they're so close in their formula that those atoms have to be picked out of our bloodstream adjacent to the cell construction site and so carefully assembled. Like adenine is 5 atoms of carbon, 5 of nitrogen, 5 of hydrogen. And guanine is 5 of carbon, 5 of nitrogen, 5 of hydrogen, and 1 of oxygen. That's the only difference between the two bases. And then
Tom, let's not get into the chemistry here. That's not what we're here for.
Just showing the need for intelligence. On. Okay, that's all.
No, I think there's different views of that. That's one of the places where we have honest disagreements. It's a good one. So we'll have to take that offline. Mark, how about you?
I wanted to come back to the truth question for Jim, to ask Jim. You know, I think we've seen in the last 10 years, the post-truth kind of epidemic in our country has infected Christians, probably even more so than the world at large. So not only the postmodernism question, but even more fundamentally, it's like who's truth and the subjectivity of what is true. I'm wondering if you see any possibility of our journal and our process of peer review, and you have to integrate your argument with the wider scholarship historically and presently. Is there any possible extension of that to wider evangelicalism in a way that could help us during this time of epistemological crises, I feel?
I'll tell you what I see in my students at the college. If you say that there is nothing actually real or true, they realize that that then applies to what they're affirming or saying as well. In other words, if you say that everything is just socially constructed, then you can argue that your statement that everything's just socially constructed is socially constructed. It comes under the same issue or problem. And so a way that I find that I can cut through that pretty fast is by asking them, as best you can tell, has there ever been a time or a place where you think that human beings should be racist? And they can certainly think of times where human beings have been racist, but they don't want to affirm that human beings ever should be racist. Or, as far as you can tell, has there ever been a time or a place where rape is the right thing to do? And I find that my students are horrified and say, no, they can't imagine that that would ever be the right thing to do. Torturing babies for fun. I mean, we can start coming up with a list that they will acknowledge as best they can tell, they're givens. They're things that are true, that are trustworthy, and that some people will vary in some aspects of ethics in life, sure. But there do seem to be some things that are clear and trustworthy and that you can build upon. And so once they've accepted that, then we're often running as to, well, how do you recognize if something is true? How do you recognize that something is not just a matter of opinion? So I do think that it's very difficult to be consistently following Derrida or Foucault, that all language is a matter of power game, because it self-destructs and it also leaves you without anything to build on. So I think we can get away from that. And then what we run into is the romanticism of, well, I just feel it, so I know it's true. And then you put two people who feel things differently, how do they talk with each other? So it's complicated, it's not easy, but that's some of what I've found useful in my own undergraduate teaching.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very good, Jim. Thank you. Bob.
Thank you. I just wanted to take the opportunity, like others have, to thank James for his wonderful work as editor of Perspectives. It's deeply appreciated, but also I'm just going to throw in, and I think it adds to James's background, his flexibility and his ability to be an efficient editor. To thank him for his time with the Canadian Scientific and Christian Affiliation, his time on the Executive Council, and his time and term as president of the CSCA. And add that it was over that time that we really started to make some moves to improve the relationship between the CSCA and the ASA in terms of just, literally improving and having some valuable perspectives on how the two organizations can work efficiently together. And I'm just going to add, I think that as I review the perspectives when it comes out, I think James's Canadian experience has helped contribute to his editorial gifts too. So, and that is something that will be of value to the ASA and the CSCA in the future. And I know, James, you'll likely continue to work to those ends. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. I so appreciate my time in CSCA, and as you notice, I keep showing up at CSCA events. That's a connection I want to maintain and will always treasure and appreciate. Great group.
Okay, thank you. John?
Thanks, Randy, for letting me double dip. James, I just love your responses here as I'm just listening to you, because it's stimulating all kinds of thoughts. It's what the ASA is quintessentially about. That's what the journal does, is captures in print and help. It's one of those tools that helps us think together better. And it strikes me as we've been talking, and what you just said about your students, it's really about asking better questions. And it seems to me what Moses did and what Jesus did and what so many of the biblical figures do, they just ask really good questions and change the conversation. Mm-hmm. And that's us. And so the smart aleck thing that I remembered was back when Cassie and I were first on the streets of Seattle, University of Washington area. And in 1971, there were T-shirts of "Challenge Authority," is what the T-shirt said. And we just came up to a stoplight, and there was a kid standing next to us, his girlfriend. He had "Challenge Authority," and I said, "Says who?" And he looked at me, and I said, "Says who?" And I looked down, and finally he looks down at his T-shirt, and I thought, okay, I didn't need to say anything else. There's just a lot of this popular thinking, and the journal has been so good at just this slow, careful conversation, which is what we need. Mark, thanks for your question about the epistemic crisis that we're in. So, Jim, maybe you want to say a bit more about the nature of that epistemic crisis as you see it, especially the science piece of it, because that's where we're concerned. And the journal is slow. Are there things we can do as members that you see from your experience as individuals in our churches, in other places, or maybe the other things you want to say about the epistemic state we're in?
See, John, you said twice that the journal is slow. It's not a web conversation that's instant. That's true. But boy, we work hard to make it move as fast as possible. So when somebody turns in an article, they get a response that they have been received within 24 hours. If it's ready for peer review, I usually send it out for peer review within a few days. We expect peer reviewers to respond within 3 weeks. And if it's accepted for publication, it's usually out within a few months. We are really fast for a peer-reviewed journal. So I just want to be sure that we're clear on that. So yes, there are ways. For example, I'm hoping the next editor will think about, is there a way to post book reviews more quickly? In other words, to go through the vetting process, but as soon as they're ready, to somehow post them rather than waiting for the next print edition. Authors would appreciate that. Readers would appreciate that. But we also want to give people a thank you gift and premium for subscribing, that you can't just get it on the web. So then you need to put up a gate even on the web, which you can do. There are all these interacting parts that are often above my pay grade to decide, and that have to be talked through and thought through about how we can achieve it. But the basic idea of vetting the conversation to make it worthwhile and trustworthy, but doing it as quickly as we can, I fully agree with you. We want to try to drive for both of those things to happen.
Okay, I think we'll have to end with that. And I was going to ask you, Jim, to give advice to your successor, and you just did, I think, to some extent.
Some things to consider, yes.
But before I close that, speaking of speed, let me just remind people, and many of you will remember this, that when I came to the ASA in 2005, I think there was like a 2 or 3 year lag in terms of getting something published. There was an incredible backlog, and we had a very hard time. For a long time, we had to add number of pages, a lot of extra pages, and it took a few years to work off the backlog. So, yeah, you've been fast, Jim. It's very good. All right. Any final comment, Jim, or have you said it all?
I just want to emphasize again, and I've often said this in editorials, that every time one of these issues comes out, I can easily count 50, 60 different people who are involved. It is very much a team effort, and I so appreciate all of you that are part of this conversation today, that have contributed to the journal. I think it's such an important source of life for ASA. It's worth our best attention. And so many of you helped to make that happen. I just really want to say thank you to that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So I want to add my appreciation to you, Jim, for your years of service. And I hope it won't end right away. I guess you'll phase out over 2024. So whatever it is, we wish you success in your next phase of life as you move on, and appreciate what you did here. So with that, I'd like to wish a Merry Christmas to everyone here. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next month.